Start recording. Awesome. And we'll be posting this recording later along with our slides for your guys' convenience. And yeah, so I hope that works out with everyone. So cool, let's get started. So for those of you who don't know already, my name is Matthew. I'm the Vice President of the Transfer Research Society. I'll be presenting the first portion of the meeting, and then Sudave is going to take over, who's the president. And then after that, Dennis is going to take over, and he's the secretary. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about how to look for research positions and how to cold email, all the nitty gritty about that, and I'll give you an overview later on. But before that, I do kind of want to give a quick disclaimer for all of y'all. So you don't need to utilize all of the information we have here today to get a research position, and it is very likely that your experience is going to be different when you try and get one. Sort of treat this as kind of a collection of information that we've gathered from interviewing a ton of people, along with our own experiences that we can kind of, I can kind of serve y'all as a good base of knowledge to draw from. So when you guys go out and look for research positions, try and like come back to this information, look for ideas that you can use for looking for research positions. Okay, so with that being said, let's give kind of a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So first, we're going to be talking about what to do before looking for a research position, how to identify the field you want to work in, a brief overview of how to skim and read published literature. And then we'll be talking about a brief overview of the entry points toward a research position. So the various like research programs, cold emailing, job posting websites like Handshake and stuff. And we also have kind of a miscellaneous section where, we'll talk about if you're in a class, how to approach a professor, or, go to the office hours, things like that. And after that, we'll have a quick Q&A break where you guys can ask us any questions about the information I've presented so far. And then Sudave is going to be taking over from there, where he'll talk about how to look for research programs in Davis. He also talk about the how to look for research positions through job posting websites, and he also talk about how to look for labs to cold email. And then after that, Dennis is going to take over and talk about how to cold email. So things like the formatting, what to attach, how to, after the sending email, what are you going to do? And we also kind of have a few case studies from our own officer team. So we have a case study from Sudave, from Dennis, and from me, where we give an example of our initial emails that we sent out to the PIs in the labs that we work at right now. And that from that, you guys can kind of get an example of what the initial email might look like. And then after that, we'll have another Q&A, and we'll end it like that. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's first talk about what to do before looking for a research position. So what should you do? What should you keep in mind and take into account when you want to get into research, but and you want to start cold emailing, applying to places, but there's some things you should first take into account before you do that. So I'll first talk about one of the most important things that you should take into account. And this also does apply kind of broadly to a lot of things when you apply to a job. You should always take into account the employer's perspective. So this is kind of the research version of that. You want to take into account the PI's perspective. So, usually contrary to popular belief, I know I had this belief when I first wanted to look into research. I was like, hey, I'm an undergrad. I'll try to get a research position. I'll just be like washing dishes and like cleaning glassware and things like that. Doing a lot of menial work, right? But this isn't actually the case when you come to Davis. Usually when you come to Davis, a PI, they usually want to spend time training a dedicated and highly motivated individual from the ground up. And a lot of PIs, they have almost kind of a vetting process to kind of test an undergrad's education, reliability, attitude, attention to detail, etc. They do this through like, menial tasks before looping them into greater responsibilities, such as, running a procedure on your own or doing your own work, becoming more independent. Now, this isn't always the case, but you should definitely keep that in mind when you first come into a new lab, and it's something you should expect. A great question to ask to kind of gauge whether or not you might be tested, quote unquote, or vetted, is you could ask what the role and trajectory might look like if you get accepted into a position. This is also for your own benefit, kind of like, okay, what am I going to do? But it also allows you to gauge whether or not, okay, the postdoc or grad student I'm working with, they might expect more attention to detail, a bit more dedication, a bit more independence, things like that. So that's why it is really important to find a field that you're interested and motivated in to do research in, but also you're willing to spend a lot of time there. Being that we're transfer students, usually a long time, that'll mean the remainder of our undergrad years. So, if you take like a quarter to adjust the pacing of UC Davis classes, then you take another quarter to kind of cold email or look for a research position, then you got about a year and a half in a lab, right? So it's important that you spend a good amount of time in that lab. And so if you're a senior or towards the end of a junior year and you're looking for a research position, that's why it's also important to sell them on your skills and abilities, because you won't really be there for quote unquote a long time, be it like a year or less than a year. So that way, if you sell them on your skills and abilities, you can kind of let them know that, hey, I don't really need a couple months of training before jumping into the good stuff, right? A lot of PIs do kind of want a 10-hour week commitment during the school year, or else it's not worth it for them. During breaks and things like that, if you do choose to work during summer break or like winter break, they might expect a higher number. So maybe like 20 or 30 hours. So definitely keep that in mind. So then how do you identify if a field is a good fit? And this might take a little bit of soul searching. It might not. Some of you might have already decided on your field of research, and some of you might have not. It's important, but it is also equally important to not get hung up on looking for the research or the perfect research position, because undergrad isn't very long and positions are limited, right? You have to be willing to be flexible on your dream fields as a way to kind of get your foot in the door so that you can be competitive by gaining basic research skills. And this can also be useful later on, right? Because if you're experimenting a lot in different fields of research early on in your career, and you figure out something that you really want to get into, then you can just dive straight into it and get deeper into it, right? It's easier to change your field of interest early on in your research career, than it is later on. So some questions you might want to ask yourself, first of all, one is, do you have the patience to spend hours upon hours in that lab to get results from an experiment? And two, are you passionate enough to spend countless hours working on projects and have the patience to repeat experiments multiple times? I've personally had this experience before where I've had to stay an extra 4 or 5 hours to kind of salvage an experiment because I made a mistake in the procedure and, I had to make what I had to do, right? So you definitely have to have that dedication and patience to see it through in lab. The quickest way to get booted from a lab or end up with poor reference letters is to just not show up when you're supposed to and fulfill your responsibilities in a reasonable amount of time. So it is better to not have a research experience for a quarter on your CV than to have an experience in which you didn't really perform well in. So in general, the main 2 points I want you to take away from this slide is that a field is a good fit if you can take patience and interest into account. So patience meaning, the tedious work for a long period of time to get results and data, and interest when reading published literature of that field, kind of like with an inquisitive mindset. Are you able to formulate good questions when learning new concepts? Are you able to critically analyze the data? That's also super important, which will probably become more important later on in your research career when you gain more experience reading literature, but it's super important to have those 2 things in mind. So with that being said, how do you read and skim published literature, right? I know it can definitely be kind of intimidating when looking at some of these papers, you see a ton of like text. It's just a wall of text, and it's a lot of things you don't understand, right? And it's a lot of information all at once. And that's definitely true. It can definitely be intimidating. But the goal here when trying to read published literature is not necessarily to completely understand what they're talking about in the paper. It's just to grasp the concepts to a point where you feel okay about chatting about it. It's very important to remember that these PIs, postdocs, and grad students, they've been at these topics for years and years. So don't feel like you've got to understand every little detail. They kind of understand that you're an undergrad, you're kind of a blank slate to work off of, and they've had tons of experience training undergrads in the past as well. So definitely keep that in mind. I apologize if you can hear the car outside my window, but definitely keep that in mind. So when you read a paper and there's something you don't understand, definitely ask the PI to kind of explain even further. That can really show you interest in their work. So, if you don't understand something, ask them. That's something they really like to see. They want to see that they're interested and you want to learn more. So, some PIs, they might have reviews on a topic they're researching. And a review paper is typically kind of a summary of a certain field of research. So kind of like when you're reading a textbook where they're just explaining certain concepts, like a biology textbook or something, they're explaining certain concepts. But it's like that, but within a certain field of research. It's like a summary of all the literature that's been happening within the past couple of years. And, if they do have reviewed papers, it's definitely a bit more convenient because you don't have to kind of look at several papers. You can just read that review paper once, and then you'll have a good overview of the field of research they're in. Other PIs might not, but majority of them should still have recently published literature that you should spend around 1 to 2 hours reading or skimming. So to skim a paper, you kind of want to read it or skim it in this order, right? You first want to read the abstract, then you want to read the titles of each section. Don't actually read the section yet, just the titles. And then you want to read the discussion and conclusion. And after that, you move on to the next section that might be most relevant for your purpose for reading it. So for our purpose, you kind of want to get the main big picture, right? So maybe skip to that section the big section that they talk about, right? Another thing you should take into account in reading literature is that you should also look at the graphics and tables, and you should read the description. This is super important later on too, because a lot of the graphics and tables, it's going to contain data, right? It's going to contain, it's usually how people represent data, and data analysis and being able to critically look at certain data, right? That's going to be very important later on in your research career. So after you've taken a look at these sections, reading the abstract, the discussion and conclusion, you want to read through the section that you're interested in, skip over the experimental details. I know that, especially for like biology, I'm using biology a lot as an example because I do research in biology, right? But the experimental details for biology papers, it contains a lot of like nitty gritty experimental details that I don't know about, right? I don't know the chemicals they're using, and that's okay, right? You're gonna learn all of these things when you first join the lab. They'll teach you the procedure you need to know. So just skip over this, it's okay. Definitely take notes if you want to. So if you're reading it, right, and if you got a question, annotate next to the section where you've got a question, and that's something you can bring up later on in like an email or an interview, and that's definitely a big plus. So, the goal, like I said before, is just to understand the big picture of what they've accomplished with the research in the paper. And a good gauge to kind of see if you're ready to talk about this is to see if you can paraphrase your finding in about 1 to 2 paragraphs. If you can, then I think you should be okay to talk about it in an email or an interview. So, cool. With that being said, with the things you should get out of the way before you start thinking about a research position, let's talk about the types of entry points. So this is going to be kind of a brief overview of the pros and cons of things like research programs, cold emailing, job posting websites, miscellaneous things like that. So let's first talk about research programs. This is usually one of the first things that comes to mind when looking for a research position. And the URC definitely has a lot of good options worth exploring, which is something we'll briefly touch on later on in a couple slides. But generally, a lot of the pros associated with this is that it can accommodate for individuals coming from disadvantaged or underrepresented backgrounds. It also provides a solid support system with the funding and stipend, which can vary from program to program. There's also an organized support system in place with the more personalized one-on-one mentoring and advising. It's also a very nicely structured formal process to get into a lab. And this is a pro because you'll see later on with cold emailing, it can be very informal. And one thing that comes with informality is that there's lack of peace of mind. And, this is definitely a pro when it comes to looking for a research position. And most importantly, a lot of programs will help you get into a lab position. So some of the cons that are also associated with this, though, is that it can be a little bit competitive depending on the program. This is mainly because there's somewhat of an application cycle. So there's like a certain period of time where you have to apply, and there's a deadline you have to apply by. And within a certain time frame, you are kind of competing, quote unquote, against other individuals. So that's definitely a con. Another con is that it can have certain background requirements that not everyone will meet, such as major requirements or class standing requirements. And I know class standing requirements is one of the big things us transfers have to go through because we're not eligible for those programs that are, only available for freshmen or sophomores, right? But although, there are programs that do kind of, they're a bit more broad, such as murals, which is open to most majors. So keep an eye out for those programs. So the next entry point is cold emailing. And typically, this is one of the most traditional ways of getting a lab position. And I think Dennis is going to be getting into the nitty gritty later on of how to actually format an email and things like that. But this basically consists of looking for a lab, cold emailing the PI, and expressing your desire to join. You can also email the grad students and postdocs in a lab that's working on a project you might be interested in, especially if it's a bigger lab where there's a lot of people. That could be a better approach towards that lab because the PI might not see your email because it's such a big lab, right? But some of the pros that are associated with this is that it is the most direct way to get a research position. You also learn a lot when searching for various labs to cold email. If you're interested in a certain field of research and you start Googling and looking for labs to cold email, you will kind of get a broad overview of all the research people are doing, right, at Davis. Also, for the most part, you're not competing against anyone else because there's no application period. It's very informal. There's not really, unless you cold email at the same time someone else does, then you're not really competing against anyone else, right? It's also great for networking and building a network. You can also find opportunities outside of your major. So for example, if you're NPB, and you're interested in field of research outside of your major, such as like sociology or things like that, you can definitely find research positions that way by just going outside your field and cold emailing, right? But some of the cons associated with this is that it does take a little bit of Googling, emailing, time, and patience, like a lot of things do. We do try to mitigate that by providing these information sessions. So, but it still does take a bit of Googling on your part to find these labs to email. So that's one con. There's also a lot of uncertainty when using this method, and a lot of PIs might not respond till days later. But there are certain ways to mitigate this with follow-up emails and things like that. Joining the lab can also be a little bit informal. There's not really a typical interview process. I know for me at least, and a lot of some of my peers, they had a very informal interview process, if you could call it that, where it's mainly just like a conversation with the PI, and by the end of it, had a research position. So, but you should always treat it as relatively formal. Always treat everything professionally, right? So, yeah. And then the next entry point I will talk about are job posting websites. So with these websites, I'm usually talking about Handshake, things like Indeed, LinkedIn, those websites. Mainly Handshake though, because that is the website UC Davis uses. Now, this entry point usually isn't very well received, at least when looking for an undergrad position. because usually the people that go to these websites have already graduated and they're looking for more of a junior specialist position. A junior specialist position usually requires, a bachelor's degree and 1 or 2 years of research. And so you might not find a lot of, undergrad research assistants that are willing to set people that have no research experience or things like that. So some of the pros that are associated with this is that it is a possible entry point. I do know some peers that have gotten research positions through job posting websites like Handshake. It is also a good way to see which places are looking to hire or take on undergrads without asking anyone. For example, if you see a certain lab is looking for an undergrad researcher, you can actually go to lab's website, and instead of applying through Handshake or whatever website you found it on, cold email them, right? That's a good strategy as well. And after you graduate, it can also be a really good tool to see what options you have following postgrad. So like I said before, things like junior specialist positions, other research positions, things like that. Some of the cons though, you might not have many job postings available because a lot of these job postings are for junior specialists or other people who already have degrees. It can take months before you hear back. I know a lot of my peers that have heard back from these job posting websites like Handshake. It's been like a couple months after they've already applied. And by that time, they've already had a research position they've got through cold emailing or another method. It can also not really be the best option when looking at time efficiency because it can take a lot of time applying for little results because you hear back so late. And it can also be a little bit more competitive because there's also that certain time frame that you should apply by, and a lot of people apply in that time frame, so you're kind of competing against other people as well. And lastly, a lot of these job postings are kind of external and not at UC Davis. So if you're looking to get a letter of recommendation from a PI or professor at Davis, it might not be your best option because a lot of these job postings are from other companies, right, that are looking to hire undergrads. Okay. So lastly, I will be talking about the miscellaneous job entry points. So this is kind of like, when things go back in person later on in fall, you have more of an opportunity to do this, right? If you're in a class, like whether it be small or large, you can always go to office hours to learn more about their research. Ask the professors questions, sit in the front of the class, and don't be afraid of being wrong when you answer questions. It's part of the learning process. A lot of professors understand that. So, and they actually like to see you get things wrong because then you learn from your mistakes, and that's always good. Definitely ask a lot of questions. And if you're able to find a mentor who you identify and feel comfortable with, that can be a key point, right? Because if you're first gen and you want to find a professor or a mentor that's also first gen, they can kind of be more understanding of the struggles you went through as a first gen student, and they can be more accommodating, right? Definitely ask them about their story and how they got there. I know a lot of professors love talking about their research and love talking about their undergrad and like how I went to grad school and things like that. So they love talking about that stuff. Also ask for articles or papers to read. They like it when students show interest in the research. And if you're not really up to talking with professors, you can also talk to the TAs instead, because the TAs typically at Davis, they're going to be grad students. And grad students, I think if you've seen from the grad student advisor team that we have, they have an abundance of information, right? And so usually if you talk to the TA, ask them, hey, I'm interested in research, they can definitely help you there. So you can also email the head of PIs of certain labs to ask if you can sit on their lab meetings and journal clubs. This kind of falls into like cold emailing, but instead of asking for a research position, asking to sit on the journal clubs or lab meetings to see, engage, and learn more about their research. This can also depend on the PI's preference though. Some might prefer you to join first before you attend lab meetings. And another way to kind of get a lab position is through Twitter. Now, I'm not too familiar with Twitter because I don't really use it, but Twitter is usually, it's a platform for word of mouth, right? And I know a lot of grad students, PIs, professors, they have Twitters because they like sharing papers and things like that, or articles they just read. to their fellow peers. So if you follow them, and as long as they're grad students, it can help you learn more about them and what they like and things like that. The undergrad thesis can also be a great way to demonstrate your research experience. I think you can also go to some of the workshops, although that does require you to have a faculty mentor beforehand. So now, last but not least, before we get into the Q&A, one con that I do want to talk about that just broadly applies to any lab position is that you are most likely going to be assigned to a grad student or postdoc as your supervisor, and then you're going to be given instructions on what to do, opposed as working directly with the PI. This is because usually PIs, at least in Davis, whether it be a kind of a medium-sized lab or a big-sized lab, they're usually more towards like the logistical side of things. I know my PI is I think he's the chair of the department, so he's handling a lot of administrative work. And so you're more likely going to be working with the grad student or postdoc as a supervisor. But don't be afraid of not being able to build a relationship with your PI. There definitely are opportunities to do that once you join the lab through like lab meetings, or, you know, if you in person, you can drop by their office and, you know, just chat about them casually about some of the hobbies you might have in common. They love to talk about things like that. So yeah. So with that being said, we shall now dive into the Q&A. So Nam is going to be talking about or handling the questions in the chat. And if you do have a question and you want to unmute yourself, please raise your hand and then we can call on you and we'll take it from there. And then I'll also be opening up the answering board to some of the transfer advisors or grad students advisors that might have been able to make it to this meeting today. So feel free to answer them as well. And then after this, Sudev is going to be taking over with his portion. So let's get started. Okay, so I see.
Right, I think, yeah, I see that Aiden has a question.
Yeah, so I hope this isn't like a super weird question. But so I'm an international relations major, and in my department, there's only like 8 professors that I could even possibly do research with. And so with reaching out to them, if I reach out to like, would it be weird? Because I'm sure they talk with each other. So would it be weird if I reached out to like 3 or 4 of them with a cold email? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, you know, usually among departments, people talk and things like that, but usually they all have their own respective field of research, right? They're all interested in different areas of research. So, I mean, if you're interested in their research, definitely feel free to cold email all of them. So.
Cool, thank you.
And one more thing, I think if anything, it shows that you're interested in research, right? The fact that you're reading multiple papers from multiple professors, I think is a plus for you. It shows that you're willing to commit to something that others might not be, you know, other people, they might be emailing just one professor or whatnot. Abdul, you're raising your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you go more into detail of what the URC is? Because you were talking about that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I can answer
ahead.
this question. So the URC is the Undergraduate Research Center. So they're kind of a official body of UC Davis that's really geared at helping students pursue research. So they have a lot of advisors on their team. You can always reach out to them if you're having issues getting, like if you have just questions about the research process. They host a lot of workshops for this and have research programs also. So yeah, it's like an official, it's like the research management part of UC Davis. That's really helped at like outreaching with, you know, people interested.
Okay.
Aditya, do you have a question?
Yes, I had a question. So should job postings be used as a last resort? Because just based off what I got from the meeting, they don't, it seems like there are not many advantages to using that as a method.
Yeah.
So
So I would say consider using job postings as a last resort. So I remember one error that me and Matt made when we were, in the same situation as you guys, is that we kind of relied on these the most, and then we would apply to these postings, and your application just gets put in a file, right? And they might, and they probably select from a pool of applicants too. So you're not really getting personal with anybody, and it's really hard to even gauge whether they're going to get back to you. So then that's even harder, because then you don't know if they ghosted you or if they're reviewing other stuff. And just for an example of a time frame, there was a job position that I felt that I was really qualified for, and I applied, and I got a response from them, and that was the only one I actually got a response from 3 months later, asking if I was still interested. And by that time I was already in the lab, so I had to decline. So again, that's just an idea.
okay.
Also,
Thank
a
you.
thing to note, most of those job postings usually aren't really what undergraduates are looking for when they think of the word research lab position. They are jobs. So a lot of them are like, you're going to be cleaning the stereotypical cleaning beakers, or they want you to do one task like data entry, or you're just going to grow this one culture 5 million times. So it's not, it is a type of experience, but it's not creating and working on a project with a mentor. So
Okay.
it's generally not the best experience. If you're going to stay in Davis over the summer, for instance, and you're looking for a job, that might be a great way to do it, because then it's both lab experience and a paid job. But if you're really looking for a research opportunity, those usually aren't it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you guys have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll give it a couple of minutes and we'll move on. Hey, I saw a question in the chat first. When is the best times to start research?
So I think for transfers, usually I'd recommend, so yeah, definitely feel like whenever you have some time, like Sarah said, if I think usually for transfers though, so say you come in, right, and you're not really used to the quarter pacing, right? I'd say take at least 1 quarter to get adjusted to the pacing. And then maybe dip your feet and Google things, see what kind of research you're interested in, look at what labs there are in that field of research, and kind of just dip your feet in certain things. But mainly focus on your classes and get adjusted to the pacing, because that's what a lot of people, it can also, it's what a lot of people don't really expect when coming to a quarter system, especially from a semester system as well. So I'd say the best time just to get started in research as a transfer would probably be after fall quarter, and during winter quarter. I'd say that's when you should start looking for a research position more seriously, and that's where you should start cold emailing, things like that. So
Yeah, and to add on to that, and to somewhat answer Aiden's question, just an example, both me and Matt, we started cold emailing in our fall quarter, and we got a response at the end of fall quarter, around like the winter break timeframe. And then we were able to get into our positions in the beginning of winter quarter. So, when you start cold emailing, it's going to take a while for you to get a good professor, for you to get even a response and an interview. So take that into account too. Yeah.
I think it should also be noted that, especially with that whole getting acquired to the quarter system during fall quarter, a lot of you, I think, this might be your first year as a transfer, so your first year at Davis. And fall quarter, make sure you talk to all your professors, especially if they're in your field. I mean, if you're a bio major, you don't have to chat up your calc professor, but if they're in your field and their research is anything close to, even if it's not quite exactly what you want, talk to them, sit in the front of the class, answer questions, ask questions, be, that nerd, because professors remember that, especially after having a year of online, they want to interact with students. So if you are an interactive student and you go up to them and ask them in person at the end of class, hey, can we set up office hours to talk about research? One, you're more likely to get a response because if you're in person, they can't just ignore an email. And two, it's a lot hard to say no to someone's face, especially someone who you've been interacting a lot with. So at that point, when you're at that meeting, even if, again, that professor's research isn't exactly what you want, that's a great time to ask them, do you have any colleagues who are doing research in this particular area? And a lot of times they do know, because everyone knows what everyone's doing. The faculty is really interconnected. And a lot of times they'll be like, oh yeah, one of my good friends, so-and-so in this department is doing exactly that. And if you can get them to put in a good word for you, that makes all the difference. Cold emailing and all that, it's great, but it's casting a really wide net and it's gonna have a really low success rate. You can find a mentor with this, but it's just a lot harder. If you can meet someone face to face, and again, use them as a springboard to connect to someone else, that's gonna be like your highest chances of getting that position.
And just bouncing off that point, once you start getting into university and university classes, you're going to have TAs that are grad students. Graduate students do research in the fields that you're likely interested in, and they work with undergrads a lot. So that's also another contact you can, meet face to face, go to office hours, talk to them about their research, and that can also help you get into the position you want, right?
Yeah, and just stating what was said in chat from one of our advisors, professors or PIs, they usually take people at the start of quarters. So you want to plan ahead, right? You want to plan so that if you're planning to do research in a particular quarter, start cold emailing and looking the quarter before that. A question in the chat. What are some websites besides Handshake for finding research positions?
I think as for websites, it's a little tough. Like Handshake, and they offer jobs, right? When it comes to research positions, your best chance of, Handshake is one. But you'd have more luck with like actually going into the professor's lab or like looking at professors' labs and seeing, if you think they have a spot open. And we'll talk more about that real soon. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna add on to that. Just like places where you can start, because there's no like centralized place where you can find like a list of labs, and it varies for every department. So I'm speaking from my experience. I'm a psych major. Sometimes the advising team, the psych advising team, will send out emails, and they'll often have like openings available. So those are, if you get emails from whoever your advisors are, those are a good place to check. And also on the UC Davis website, if you go on like the department faculty, you can find like a link to the professor's lab websites if they do have a lab. And then I think that's a great place to start if you're looking to see like which professors have labs that you can potentially like cold email. And so that's a place to look. Yeah, there isn't one place. You have to kind of dig around a bit.
All right. And I'm sure there's a couple more questions, but we do have a second Q&A at the end of this information session. So let's move on for now, and maybe we'll be able to answer some of the questions you guys are asking right now. So now that you have a general overview of how to think about what you want out of your research experience. The next step is, well, how do you actually go about looking for positions? So the one way is research programs. Now, like I said before, the Undergraduate Research Center, or URC at UC Davis, is a good resource to find these research programs. And you can, we have a link to their website. It's just, they have a programs page and they have it all listed out. And additionally, we have a matrix of all the programs URC offers on our Discord. And if you can't view it, you can always just message us and we'll send you the link again. In particular, EEOP, or I think Educational Enrichment and Outreach Programs, are useful. Though, if you go into the upper division section, those are made for upper division students, those who come from low income, disadvantaged backgrounds. And if you fulfill some of their metrics or some of their criteria, they could be willing to help you. And a lot of the coordinators for these programs are approachable, and you can ask them questions about, what to expect or how to apply, or if it's a rolling admission. UC Davis also has a vertically integrated projects program. So that's VIP. That's just another example of a research program. And it wasn't really listed on the official URC website. So that's why we kind of included the link there. Now, if you're looking for more research programs, you can always check the NSF, or the National Science Foundation. They have a list of research experiences for undergraduates. These are like research programs. This is a third-party thing, and most of the programs are really offered in the summer, but the application process is like in the fall. So, that's another potential entry point. Now, generally, research programs want a resume, a cover letter, and likely some essay questions. And a key tip is always, if you know you fulfill the requirements for this program, apply early. You don't know whether they have a rolling admissions basis or not. Most will tell you, but it's still always good to apply early. And again, like I said before, it never hurts to email the directors of these programs to explain your situation and ask if there's potential spots for the future. Now we can talk about job posting sites. The main one is Handshake. I haven't really seen any research jobs that are offered outside of here. These typically only require a resume and a cover letter to apply. And if they get back to you, it'd probably be 1 to 2 interviews. If you were going to go this route, and again, we do recommend this to be your last option, things to keep an eye out for is the date when the job was posted. Ideally, you want to apply for positions that's less than a month ago. And if you can find who posts the listing, you can adjust your resume to fit that lab, because a lot of these job postings are done by coordinators and lab managers, not necessarily the PI. And they also clearly list a job description requirements, and you can hone your resume to kind of cover that skill set. Now, the other way you can use some of these job posting sites is to see who's actually hiring undergraduates and emailing the staff there saying, hey, I was really interested in this. And emails are more personable, and they could allow for better response times. But again, use this as kind of a last resort. And the last thing is lab websites. Cold emailing faculty, like we said before, is a good way to reach out to those who are doing really specific research that you're interested in, or maybe in specific fields where research isn't as common. So the way to do this is find a list of PIs that are doing research in your field of interest. You can go to the department website of your field and then see which PIs are doing research. And you want to look at whether they have an external website, like their lab website. And the way you can do that is just look up their name and lab, and then put that in Google and see if you get a hit. And a lot of these lab websites, if they are accepting undergraduates, they will list what they want from you, whether they want some experience or what their expectations are. And so make sure you check that out. And additionally, PIs can be on Twitter, so you can get a good idea of who they are, what they like to do, and how would you tailor that email or future interview. And now for places to look, like I said, your most college websites like the Department of Molecular Bio will have a list of all the faculty that do molecular bio. And then a lot of them would have links to their actual lab websites. And the classes you're enrolled in might have professors who also do, who also owns their own research lab, so you can look them up. And if you do well in their class, you can email them to express the interest in their research. And now, when you are in a lab website, what to look for? So look for a page that describes their research, like the recent topics they've actually published. And UC Davis should allow you like scientific journal access, and you can actually read their research. And spend 1 to 2 hours reading their research, making sure you know what they actually do. Look how often they publish. Ideally, you want a lab with the high publication rate, but again, that varies so much by field. So, it's all right if it's not within what you expect. And then look at current lab members. If there's undergraduates in there, then they accept undergraduates. That's great. If they don't have undergraduates in there, that doesn't mean they don't accept undergraduates. It's just that they just don't list them there, and you can still email them. And this can also let you gauge the size of the lab. And if it's a giant lab, you might also want to email like the assistant to the PI or graduate students instead. But again, don't be intimidated by size. They may be willing to take on more undergraduates if you show enough interest. And again, in the lab website, you're really scouring for any indication that they're willing to take on undergrads. And if you see that, that's great. And if you can, really try to talk to current students in the lab. Again, this isn't a hard requirement. I remember when I was trying to apply for, I think, the violence prevention program at the Department of Emergency Medicine, I actually reached out to a person who was in the lab before via LinkedIn and asked her what her experience was and what she liked about it, and whether she could forward my resume to the person in charge. And again, it's a good idea to kind of test who like what the lab culture is. So that kind of concludes my portion, and now Dennis will be talking about how to actually craft that cold email.
Alrighty. So yeah, as Dave said, I'll be going over how to cold email, since for most people this tends to be one of the biggest entrances into a lab. Next slide, please. So tips for emails. So once you've identified a PI or a lab that you want to cold email, you want to craft an email that clearly and punctually explains your interest, your enthusiasm, and commitment to their research. So I would recommend not making a template if you're emailing multiple labs. It's better to spend the extra time to personalize the email and cater it towards each specific PI, and it allows you to demonstrate your interest and passion towards their research better. And we say at most keep the email to about 2 to 3 paragraphs with a max of 7 sentences in the entire email. Professors and PIs don't have a ton of time and they get a lot of emails, so you want them to be able to read through your email, and they wouldn't want to take the time reading a whole essay. And they should be able to skim your email and get the main points across in less than 30 seconds. If you can make your point in about 1 sentence, then go ahead and do it. And don't be afraid to name drop classes, professors, or programs that connect you to that lab. Whether a professor that you took a class with led you to this PI's lab, or if you took a class with this PI, I would say go ahead and do it, as it's another way to get in. Next slide. So another big thing is the timing of when you send the cold email. So I would recommend starting at least a few months before you actually want to start a research position, as it can take anywhere from a week to find a position up to a couple of months. It just depends on how lucky you are. And but it's also possible that a PI would want you to start as soon as possible. So when you send the initial email, make your own timing clear, whether you want to start right this quarter or wait till fall, summer, etc. And don't let your poor planning turn into another person's emergency. So try to avoid like seeming super desperate to a PI to get you hired right on the spot. As it's been mentioned before, it should be on PI's terms. You want to cater to the PI. And as for timing during the academic year, I'd really recommend to avoid sending emails right at the end of the quarter or right after the quarter ends, as a lot of these PIs, they're also professors and they teach, and they're usually busy with finals, grading, and their inboxes are flooded with students worrying about their grades. So your email could easily get lost in the inbox. And another thing is try to avoid sending emails over the weekend. A lot of PIs tend to not open their inbox during the weekend, and with all the other emails they get over the weekend, on Monday morning when they come into their office, they might not see your email. So my best recommendation would be to send an email in the morning on a weekday. So that way, first thing, the PI or lab manager comes into the office, opens their email, and your email is towards the top of their inbox. And if you can, try and find a professional or a peer to lean on during this process. So that way they can provide feedback and insight about how to find a position in a certain department. And leaning on friends, grad students, professors, or even your parents to receive feedback about your cold email before you send it out can be super helpful. And I know me and Dave, Matt, we all use this to our advantage. Now onto how to format the email. So again, we don't really recommend a specific template, but here we have some things that you should consider having in your email. So in the first paragraph, usually we recommend starting off by wishing the PI well, introducing yourself, talking about what your major is, and then express your interest in their research with one sentence. Mention what you found interesting in their published paper, connected to your own personal interest, to try and show why exactly you want to work in this research lab. And then you want to let the PI know that you want to set up a meeting with them to talk about undergrad research position in their lab, or just to talk about their studies. Some PIs don't really like hearing straight up that you want to find a research position. So it might be a not bad idea to say that you want to talk about the research and then bring up asking about if they have a position during the actual meeting. And a lot of PIs will redirect you to a grad student or a postdoc, which is completely fine, as if they have a big lab, you'll be most likely working under a grad student or a postdoc. And you can still ask the grad student or the postdoc if they would be willing to take you on as an undergrad. And then in the second paragraph, thank them for taking the time to read your email, express your excitement. You really want to show that you're enthusiastic and passionate about this research, and let them know that you attached your resume. And then, so some things to attach. So in general, you want to attach your resume or CV and anything else that they might have listed on their website to include in an email. And then we also know that for some social sciences and humanities fields, they want you to have a writing sample prepared in case they ask you to provide one. And you will really want to make sure you proofread it before you submit it. And so a writing sample is typically a 2 to 3 page write-up or essay from a previous class that demonstrates your writing abilities. Now, again, this isn't for all social sciences and humanities. Many might not ask for one, but it's still good to have one just in case. And the biggest thing, remember to proofread. Make sure there's no typos. The easiest way to get your email sent to the junk pile is if a PI notices that you have typos and grammatical mistakes in your email. Now we're going to show some of the board members' emails that got them into their labs.
All right. So when I sent this email to my current PI, I was very concise and brief with my points. And keep in mind, my style of email, Dennis's style of email, Matt's style of email is all different. We have different ways of accomplishing the same thing. But, I said, I'm an undergraduate junior majoring in biological sciences at UC Davis, and I was interested to know whether you have a spot open in your lab for an undergraduate research assistant. So right off the bat, in the first sentence, I'm very clear and upfront on, this is why I'm emailing you. And then I said, I'm interested in neuroscience. And then I talked about the research that she did just to show that, I did read it. And then in my third sentence, I say I have a strong background in medical terminology. I was a medical scribe for the past year, and I have experience in programming. So again, I'm mentioning my own skills, which I feel would be a good fit for this lab. And then, of course, attach my resume. Thank you for your time and consideration. And I really think what helped me get that response is, I was concise. If someone's busy, they could skim this and still know what I'm talking about. And I'm really mentioning the skills I have, as early as possible.
All right, so this was the email that I used. So I started off by greeting the lab manager. Since my lab's fairly big, it's the lab manager that's in charge of new undergrads and hiring. So I started off by wishing him well, introducing myself, my major, where I transferred from, and showing that I'm eager in getting involved in research. So then I wrote out what I found interesting about the research and how I found it very exciting and how it connects with my interest in pain medicine. And then I said that I was very interested in working with a postdoc at the lab that focuses on behavioral and neurobiology research. But I also try to make it clear that I'm interested and want to help out in any way possible. And then I talked about how I'd love to have a meeting, discuss their studies, and potentially a position at their lab. Thank them for reading my email and attached my resume.
So this is my email. So this is the initial email I sent to Hire Labs, where I'm currently working right now. So I sent this to Dr. Hire. I said hello. I wish them well. I told them how I found their lab through the UC Davis Comprehensive Cancer Center, and then I introduced myself as a third-year undergrad, and I'm looking for a part-time research position to learn more about cancer research. And then I started talking about their research and how that ties in with my learning. Kind of like, hey, I think joining a lab would be beneficial to both you and me. And then I asked if I could set up a Zoom meeting for them to to see if I can join the lab. Now, I added an extra paragraph in my email, which I don't think is very relevant now, and you can definitely exclude this in your email, because nowadays I think lab operations are back in person. When I cold email my PI, things were still limited. They're only letting postdocs and grad students in person in lab. So I told them, hey, I know that the COVID-19 situation is totally understandable if you're not able to take on any new undergrads. But the point I really wanted to emphasize with this was that, I told them, hey, if you accept me, I'm willing to stay for the remainder of my undergrad years to do research in your lab. So yeah, after that, I told them, I attached my resume to this email, told them, if you have any questions, need more documents, feel free to contact me, thank them for their time. And that was my email. I think the main 3 points, I think, was that one, I talked about their research. I was also kind of direct in that, I want a research position and I want to set up a Zoom meeting. And then the third point is that, I told them I was willing to spend my time there to do research.
All right, so next up I'll talk about what to do after you sent out the email. So it could vary, but you could get a response from the PI anywhere from that same night or day, or it could take a couple of days or weeks. So we say in general to wait at least 1 to 2 weeks before sending a follow-up email, since it's easily possible that PI might have missed your email or they just had a very busy week. We try and say don't send more than 2 or 3 follow-up emails. And after the third one, you kind of have to take the message that either they're not looking for undergrad or they wouldn't like to take you. But during that waiting period, you could also simultaneously contact grad students in the lab, try and get connected with them to learn more about the lab. And another thing is, if you're planning on sending out emails to more than one lab, it's a good idea to stagger them and not send out massive emails all at once. So that way you don't have to juggle potentially multiple responses and interviews in a short time span. And it allows you more time to just focus on reading the papers for one specific lab. And also, I would like to say, as I've said before, try and plan ahead and start sending out cold emails ahead of time and not in the last few weeks before you want to start doing research, just because it could take anywhere from a week or two up to a few months just to find a position. It really varies on your luck and what opportunities are out there. And last but not least, I really want to give a big shout out and big thank you to Alyssa, Sarah, Sarai, and Juliana for revising the information we presented today, as well as to Elaine, Sims, Annalise, Neha, Aaron, and Miranda for sharing their experiences with us. It's been a huge help, and we couldn't do this without them, and create all this information in one presentation for you guys to help you all out. Now on to our second Q&A session.
Yeah, so we're also going to be answering questions about the previous section right now that you guys didn't get to ask earlier. So yeah, you guys can just raise your hands like last time, or just post your questions in the chat room. Yeah, I believe Abdul asked this earlier and it was answered, but let me just repeat it. Is it okay to email or cold email professors who you don't have classes with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's totally okay to cold email professors that you don't have classes with. You know, a lot of professors, if they have their own lab, they're usually in their own respective field of research. And if you're interested in that research, definitely reach out to them, express your interests, cold email them, introduce yourself. Yeah, totally do it.
Yeah, and I
And
mean,
also,
Sarah, why don't you?
I was just going to say that the point of cold emailing is generally you cold email because you don't have a class with them. If you have a class with a professor, you really shouldn't send them a cold email because that decreases your chances. If you're in a class with them, especially in fall when we're going to be physically in classes, walk up to them and talk to them in person. Because again, it's so easy, both accidentally and on purpose, for emails to just get dismissed. They get so many emails every single day that they might just look and be like, oh, another person asking about research, delete. But if you walk up to them in person after class and specifically ask them to their face, they're not just gonna be like, oh, whatever, I don't want to talk to you. It's a lot easier to do that over email though. So absolutely cold email professors who you don't have classes with, but when you have a class with them, don't bother with the cold email, just go straight up and talk to them.
Right, and one more question that was asked earlier. Can you only look for research positions related to your major?
Sorry. I mean, you can look for research positions for any field. I mean, most people will do it for their major because they're interested in that. But you know, we know plenty of people who are doing research in a variety of different fields, like education, when their major was international relations, or when their major was NPB, right? So it is completely fine as long as you're genuinely interested in what they do, and you've took the time, you've read their research, and you've expressed that. Yeah, you can do research in any field.
I will kind of add on though to keep in mind if you are interested in a field of research and that's not your major, that it is super important to express that you're very interested in learning how to gain those research skills, because if it's in, say, like if you did an NPB and you want to do sociology research, you might not have prior sociology experience in those classes, like taking those classes and things like that. So it is very important to kind of emphasize your interest in learning more.
Okay, question in the chat asking how to balance schoolwork and research. So tips.
I think the first thing, when you do have that research interview and things like that, most professors do kind of expect you to spend at least 10 hours a week on research. And you will have to decide and plan out your classes accordingly, and also be upfront with them and say, hey, this is what I'm expecting around 10 to 12 hours. I don't know if I can go any more. And once you're in the lab, you can talk about it some more. And I've had cases where I've had a really busy week, and I've been upfront with my PI, and I said, hey, it's like it's finals week right now, or it's the week before finals. I might not be able to do as much, but I'll make up for it in the break, something like that. But again, generally 10 to 12 hours is kind of the norm. With sometimes it'll be a little less, sometimes it'll be a little bit more, depends on the week. But yeah.
Also, I would like to add on, most PIs and professors, they know that school is going to be your top priority. Like they'll, like mine was up front when I asked him. He said, yeah, like you're paying for an education. You're paying to get that bachelor's degree, or bachelor of science, bachelor of arts, and that comes first. Like if you don't have as much time for research, let them know. They'll like chill out for a second, let you focus on schoolwork. Like they'd rather have you get good grades and focus on something that you have to focus on at this moment. Like research is something you can do after you graduate as well. While fixing your grades is a bit harder.
And yeah, definitely just to add on, it can also depend on your lab work, because if you are, say, like, at least in my experience, like cell biology, or like cancer research, if you have cells to take care of, and you know it can be, cells can definitely be a bit demanding. They are kind of like babies, and so when you do have cells to take care of in like a biology lab or cancer research lab, your schedule will revolve around those cells. So it is important, if you are doing like things that involve cells and you have cell cultures to take care of, it is important to take that into account. Although this is very specific though, so.
Okay, I think Aiden had his hand up, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was going to ask about applying for positions / cold emailing professors at other schools.
So applying for positions and cold emailing professors at other schools, I think is definitely feasible. But I think you'd have to be in the same like vicinity as that school. So if, I mean, we go to UC Davis, you could try looking for research labs at maybe Sac State, if you're willing to commute to Sac, and other nearby universities. So I think it definitely works out. You can definitely do it. You can also try and look into also the affiliated UC Davis centers. So like I know Sudev is doing research right now at the School of Medicine. You could also try looking at the School of Veterinary Science to do research, and other affiliated schools. It doesn't always have to be like, okay, you're in a certain college, you have to do research in that college. No, you can definitely expand your interests.
And also, I want to say, a lot of people that I know that did research at other schools, they tend to do it over the summer, since they can fly out or drive out to those other schools and do research there for the summer. I do know some people, especially during COVID, were able to do research at other schools virtually. So you could see, like, if depending on what your major is, whether that is an option, and ask around. but I'd say summer is like the best bet. And local universities, like Matt said, like Sac State, Berkeley, that kind of stuff.
Okay, another question in the chat. This is a good one. What would you recommend that we do if professors/PIs do not have a well-maintained website, no recent publications or projects listed?
I'd say that this is actually pretty common, especially depending on the department that you're in. So the first thing is, even if they don't have an individual website for their lab, they will have a page on their department website. The department website will at minimum list their credentials. It'll list their office, email, and usually an office phone number. And generally, the department websites will also list a few publications. If their department website doesn't have that, then make sure you familiarize yourself with the UC Davis library system. And you can go into the library system and type in that professor's name and search up your professor. And the publications that they wrote will come up. So that's another way to do it. It's hard to know exactly what the current projects are, but usually if you look through their publications, they're probably working something in the area of their most recent publication.
Okay, another question. When applying to research, which position should we aim for?
When you apply to research labs as an undergraduate, it's usually a volunteer kind of position. If you're still in school and they're teaching at the school, I mean, you're really a assistant to the researcher, right? So that's kind of like a research assistant position. I'm not really sure if there's like anything else at the stage you will be applying to.
In my experience, people will generally refer to you as either an assistant researcher or more commonly an undergraduate researcher. So that'll often be, these aren't really official positions. It's more like sneaking your way into a lab and the professor saying, sure, you can help me on this. And depending on the professor and your desires, they might actually hand off a project to you or help you create an independent project within the lab. So that's a really good opportunity, especially if you could get your name onto any types of publication if you're looking at grad school or med school or vet school or anything along those lines.
Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to post them in the chat. Okay, question. When is our next information session, which is going to be about cover letters and resume workshopping?
So that's going to be 2 weeks from now. That is the, I forgot the dates.
The 24th.
Right, okay. It's going to
At
be the
6 p.m.
24th. Right, 24th, same time at 6 p.m. PST. So, and that's going to be about resume and cover letter workshop. And I think between that, so a week from now, next Saturday, we're going to also have like a Discord social where we kind of just chat. And I think we'll be opening up a channel soon on Monday to kind of talk to you all about like some of the games you might want to play, things like that. So, yeah.
Any other last questions?
Okay, so it seems like we're all concluded with this meeting. Thank you everyone so much for coming to our meeting and information session. We hope you learned something new. And we hope this helps you get a research position.
Yes.
We will be posting the slides for this on our Discord and on our website as well. I need to update the website. But we will be doing that and we'll send it out as soon as we can. So thank you guys so much for coming. Hope you have an awesome rest of your weekend.